The Ferengi laughed as images of Earth filled their view screens, not realizing they would very soon learn to fear the humans that lived there. Grand Nagus Indus cackled as he saw the rolling green hills and blue oceans of the primitive planet his probe had discovered. Standing on a raised dais in the Grand Assembly Hall, he gestured at the pathetic world with a dismissive wave. Thousands of Ferengi had gathered here on Ferenginar, summoned by Indus's proclamation that he had found a new species ripe for conquest, bipedal mammals called humans. "Look at them, so weak and disorganized," Indus scoffed. "They have not even ventured beyond their own star system. Their technology is centuries behind ours, and their governments squabble amongst themselves constantly. We will enslave these humans and plunder their world for profit." The Ferengi crowd roared their approval, chanting "Indus, Indus," and shaking their fists. Greed shone in their eyes as they imagined the immense wealth Earth would bring them. But one human would soon hear their transmission and realize the terrible danger his species was in. Keith Dixon sat alone in his cubicle at Rocketdyne Aerospace, squinting at lines of code on his computer screen. Boredom weighed heavily on the 35-year-old engineer. He had never found a project that truly challenged his brilliant mind. Suddenly, an alert flashed red, and a garbled audio message blared through his speakers. Heart pounding, Keith put it through a decryption algorithm, his eyes widening as he made out the words "human" and "enslave." He felt a chill as he realized he was listening to an alien transmission, a declaration of war against Earth. But when Keith tried to warn the authorities, they just laughed and said it must be a prank. No one would believe him. As he sat there, stunned and horrified, he knew that the burden of saving humanity from alien conquest had just fallen on his shoulders alone. He was the only one who understood the danger, and the massive Ferengi war fleet was already on its way. Keith's hands shook as he stared at the alien transmission, heart pounding in his chest. He had to do something, but this was too big for him to handle alone. With a deep breath, he picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "Jack, it's Keith. I know it's been a while, but I need your help. It's about the fate of the entire human race." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Keith could picture his brother's face, the scars from his years in special forces, the hardness in his eyes. But when Jack finally spoke, his voice was steady. "I'm listening. What's going on?" Keith explained everything. The alien transmission, the Ferengi's plans for conquest, the looming invasion. To his surprise, Jack didn't question a word of it. "I've got your back, little brother. This is bigger than our past beef. I know some people who can help. Give me a few hours." Marcus, a lanky 28-year-old with a mop of unruly black hair, cracked his knuckles. "I've never hacked an alien system before, but I'm always up for a challenge." Dr. Novak, a distinguished 55-year-old with graying temples, nodded grimly. "I've been working on a classified propulsion project for years. I think it might be the key to stopping these Ferengi." As the team huddled around Keith's computer, poring over the transmission and strategizing, a new message suddenly blared through the speakers. But this time, it wasn't just Keith listening. The Ferengi were broadcasting to the entire planet. "People of Earth," a sneering voice boomed, "I am Grand Nagus Indus of the Ferengi Alliance. Your planet and your species now belong to us. Resistance is futile. Surrender immediately, and your conquest will be swift and painless. Defy us, and you will be crushed without mercy." Keith and his team watched in horror as scenes of chaos erupted on the news, riots, looting, governments in disarray. The Ferengi's propaganda was already wreaking havoc, and their fleet was drawing closer by the second. "We need a plan fast," Jack said, his jaw tightening. "We can't let these bastards win." "I might have something," Dr. Novak replied, pulling up a schematic on his tablet. "There's a top-secret military base not far from here. They have a prototype spacecraft equipped with advanced weaponry and shields. If we can get our hands on it, we might stand a chance against the Ferengi." Keith nodded, a grim determination settling over him. "Then that's our play. We infiltrate the base, steal the spacecraft, and take the fight to the Ferengi. We're the only ones who know the truth, the only ones who can stop them. The fate of humanity rests on our shoulders, gentlemen. Let's get to work." As Keith, Jack, Marcus, and Dr. Novak made their final checks on the modified spacecraft, an unexpected figure strode into the hangar. The team tensed, reaching for their weapons, but the man held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "At ease, gentlemen. I'm General Alexander Thompson, and I'm here to help." The general was a grizzled man in his 60s, his face lined with scars and his eyes piercing. Despite his age, he moved with the coiled grace of a predator. Keith stepped forward, eyeing the general warily. "How did you find us, and why should we trust you?" Thompson chuckled. "Son, I've been watching you since you first intercepted that Ferengi transmission. You've got guts, and you're our best shot at stopping this invasion. I'm not here to arrest you. I'm here to give you what you need to win." With a snap of his fingers, Thompson summoned a team of soldiers into the hangar. They were lean and hard, their eyes glinting with the same determined fire that burned in Jack's gaze. "Meet Sergeant Michael Henderson and Lieutenant Sarah Collins. Mac's a weapons specialist, and Raven's the best damn pilot I've ever seen. They'll be joining you on this mission." Mac, a burly man with a shaved head and a scar running down his cheek, grinned as he hefted a massive plasma rifle. "I've been itching for a fight. Let's show these Ferengi what humans are made of." Raven, a lithe woman with raven black hair and piercing blue eyes, nodded in agreement. "I'll get you to their fleet no matter what it takes." With the general's backing and their new teammates, Keith and his crew finalized their preparations with renewed determination. They christened their ship the Phoenix, a symbol of the hope they carried for all humanity. As the Phoenix rocketed out of Earth's atmosphere and into the stars, Keith felt a mix of fear and exhilaration thrumming through his veins. This was it. The fate of the world hung in the balance. "We're coming up on the Ferengi fleet," Raven reported, her fingers flying over the controls, preparing to engage. But as the alien warships came into view, Keith frowned in confusion. The ships were massive, dwarfing the Phoenix in size, but they looked outdated, clunky, not at all the sleek, advanced vessels he had been expecting. Jack nodded, his eyes narrowing. "They're complacent. They've never faced a real fight before, so they've let their tech stagnate. They rely on fear, not firepower." A slow grin spread across Keith's face as realization dawned. "Then let's give them something to be afraid of." Raven whooped as she sent the Phoenix diving towards the Ferengi flagship, dodging the clumsy blasts from the alien cannons with ease. The human ship danced around the lumbering warships, peppering them with blasts from its advanced weapons array. "Their shields are failing," Marcus crowed from his station, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "We've got them on the ropes." Keith turned to Mac, his eyes blazing with determination. "Get your team ready, we're going in." With a feral grin, the sergeant hefted his rifle and barked orders to his soldiers. As the Phoenix swooped in close to the flagship, he activated the ship's teleportation array, locking on to Indus's location. "Let's go have a chat with the Grand Nagus," Jack growled, checking his weapons. "Time to end this once and for all." In a flash of light, Keith, Jack, Mac, and the soldiers vanished from the Phoenix's deck, materializing on the bridge of the Ferengi flagship. Alarms blared, and Ferengi screamed as the humans opened fire, cutting through their ranks with ruthless efficiency. Keith charged forward, his eyes locked on the cowering figure of Indus. The Grand Nagus stumbled back, fumbling for his own weapon, but Keith was faster. He leveled his blaster at the alien's head, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, a hidden door burst open, and a dozen Ferengi guards poured onto the bridge, weapons blazing. Keith dove for cover, swearing as he returned fire. The humans were outnumbered and caught off guard. "We need backup," he shouted into his comm over the sound of battle. "Raven, get us out of here." But there was only static on the line. Keith's heart seized with fear. Had something happened to the Phoenix? Were they stranded on this alien ship, surrounded by enemies, with no way out? The Ferengi closed in, their weapons glowing with deadly energy, and Keith knew they were out of time. He looked to Jack, seeing his own grim determination reflected in his brother's eyes. They had come this far. They couldn't fail now. With a roar of defiance, Keith leaped from cover and charged towards Indus, firing as he ran. Blaster bolts filled the air as the humans and Ferengi clashed in a desperate, brutal battle for survival and the fate of Earth itself. Blaster bolts singed the air as Keith, Jack and the human soldiers fought their way through the Ferengi flagship's winding corridors. Alarms blared, and Ferengi screamed as they fell before the human onslaught. Keith ducked as a Ferengi swung a crackling energy baton at his head. He retaliated with a vicious uppercut that sent the alien sprawling. All around him, the human soldiers were making short work of the Ferengi guards, their superior training and combat experience overwhelming the complacent aliens. "Their hand-to-hand skills are a joke," Sergeant Henderson shouted as he slammed a Ferengi into the wall. "Guess they've never had to fight for real before." Jack grunted in agreement as he snapped a Ferengi's arm with a sickening crack. "Makes our job easier. Push forward to the bridge." As they neared their objective, a massive figure stepped out from a side passage blocking their path. It was a hulking Ferengi, towering over even Mac, with bulging muscles and a cruel sneer on his face. He hefted a crackling energy hammer, its head glowing with destructive power. "I am Grok, bodyguard to the Grand Nagus," the giant rumbled. "You will go no further, humans." Jack stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "Keith, take the others and get to the bridge. I'll handle this brute." As Keith, Mac and the soldiers raced onwards, the sounds of Jack and Grok's titanic clash echoed through the corridors. The crunch of armored fists on flesh, the crackle of the energy hammer, the grunts and roars of two warriors locked in mortal combat. The bridge doors loomed before them, and Keith didn't slow down. He slammed into them at a full sprint, the metal crumpling under the force of his armor-enhanced strength. The doors burst open, and Keith rolled into the room, coming up with his blaster ready. Grand Nagus Indus spun to face him, his eyes bulging with shock and rage. "You? But how? You're just a primitive. How did you get on my ship?" Keith leveled his blaster at the Ferengi leader's head, his eyes hard as steel. "Guess you underestimated us primitives, Indus. We're not as weak as you thought." Indus snarled, baring his sharp teeth. "Insolent creature, I'll rip you apart with my bare hands." To Keith's surprise, the Grand Nagus threw aside his gaudy robes, revealing a muscular frame bristling with cybernetic enhancements. Indus lunged at him with astonishing speed, a vibroblade humming to life in his hand. Keith met the charge head-on, blocking Indus's slash with his armored gauntlet. The human and Ferengi leaders traded blows in a furious dance of death, spinning and striking faster than the eye could follow. But for all his cybernetic upgrades, Indus was no match for Keith's skill and strength. The human ducked under a wild swing and drove his fist into the Ferengi's gut, doubling him over. A spinning kick sent Indus crashing to the deck, his vibroblade skittering away. Keith pounced, pinning the Grand Nagus with a knee on his chest. Around them, Mac and the soldiers were securing the bridge, rounding up the last of the Ferengi crew. The door hissed open and Jack limped in, his armor scorched and dented, but a fierce grin on his face. Grok won't be a problem anymore. Keith hauled Indus to his feet, glaring into the Ferengi's furious eyes. "It's over, Indus, you've lost." He dragged the Grand Nagus over to the communications console and activated the fleet-wide broadcast. Indus's battered face appeared on every Ferengi viewscreen. "Ferengi fleet, this is Keith Dixon of Earth," Keith declared. "Your leader is beaten and your flagship is under our control. Surrender immediately or be destroyed." One by one, the Ferengi ships began to power down their weapons, responding to Keith's ultimatum. It seemed the fight had gone out of them with their leader's defeat. But suddenly a dozen Ferengi vessels broke formation, barreling towards the flagship with weapons charged. A new voice boomed over the comm channels. "This is Creel, second in command of the Ferengi fleet. I do not recognize Indus's surrender. Loyal Ferengi, attack, destroy the humans, and retake the flagship." Keith swore as the bridge rocked under the impact of Creel's opening salvo. They had beaten Indus, but the battle was far from over. The Loyalist ships bore down on them, cannons blazing, and Keith knew they were in for the fight of their lives. The Phoenix shuddered as a barrage of Creel's cannon fire slammed into its shields. On the bridge, Marcus swore under his breath as he furiously typed commands into his console. "Shields at 60%! We can't take much more of this!" Dr. Novak leaned over his shoulder, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm working on hacking their weapon systems, but Creel's ship has additional firewalls. Just buy me a little more time." In the pilot's seat, Lieutenant Collins gritted her teeth, her hands flying over the controls. She sent the Phoenix into a dizzying spiral, narrowly evading another salvo. "I'll keep us in one piece, Doc, but hurry. We're running out of tricks." Aboard the captured Ferengi flagship, Sergeant Henderson and his soldiers fought off waves of Creel's loyalist boarding parties. The Ferengi attackers swarmed through the corridors, their energy weapons sizzling through the air, but the human warriors met them head-on with grim determination. Henderson ducked under a wild swing from a Ferengi raider, then smashed his armored fist into the alien's face, shattering teeth. "Hold the line, men!" he roared, blasting another Ferengi with his rifle. "We can't let these bastards retake the ship." On Creel's bridge, Keith and Jack burst through the doors, weapons blazing. Creel spun to face them, a mocking sneer on his face. "You humans don't know when to quit, do you?" he snarled, his cybernetic enhancements glinting in the harsh light. Keith leveled his blaster at the treacherous Ferengi. "It's over, Creel. Indus is beaten and your fleet is in ruins. Surrender now, and we can end this without any more bloodshed." Creel threw back his head and laughed, a harsh grating sound. "Surrender? To primitives like you, never." His eyes gleamed with madness. "I've spent years manipulating that fool Indus, biding my time, waiting for the perfect moment to seize power, and you humans blundered right into my trap." He lunged at Keith and Jack, moving with unnatural speed, his fists crackling with energy. The brothers dove aside, firing their weapons, but Creel's enhanced reflexes allowed him to dodge the blasts with ease. Jack rolled to his feet, glaring at the Ferengi traitor. "So this whole invasion, the attack on Earth, it was all just a ploy for you to take control?" "Of course," Creel sneered, stalking forward. "Indus was too soft, too weak to see the true potential of the Ferengi alliance. But under my rule, we will conquer not just Earth, but the entire galaxy." He lashed out with a flurry of blows, his enhanced strength driving Keith and Jack back. The brothers fought with desperate skill, but Creel's cybernetic upgrades gave him a terrifying advantage. On the Phoenix's bridge, Dr. Novak let out a triumphant shout. "I've got it. Hacking their weapon systems now." His fingers danced across the console, lines of code flashing on the screen. One by one, the loyalist Ferengi ships fell silent, their weapons disabled, their shields failing. Lieutenant Collins seized the opportunity, targeting the defenseless vessels with the Phoenix's advanced weaponry. Explosions bloomed in the void as Creel's ships were consumed by fire, the loyalist fleet crumbling before the human onslaught. On the flagship's bridge, Sergeant Henderson and his soldiers let out a ragged cheer as the last of the Ferengi boarders fell before their guns. But on Creel's bridge, the battle still raged. Keith and Jack fought with desperate fury, their armor scorched and dented, their bodies battered and bleeding. Creel was a whirlwind of destruction, his cybernetic fists smashing consoles and bulkheads with each blow. Alarms shrieked as the ship's systems began to fail, the vessel shuddering under the strain of the battle. Creel's eyes blazed with insane fury as he bore down on Keith, his fists raised for a killing blow. But Jack lunged forward, tackling the Ferengi traitor around the waist. They crashed to the deck in a tangle of limbs, Jack's hands scrabbling for Creel's throat. The Ferengi howled in rage, his enhanced strength allowing him to break Jack's grip and hurl him across the bridge. Keith leaped to his brother's aid, firing his blaster point-blank into Creel's chest. The Ferengi's armor held, but the force of the blast sent him staggering back. Keith pressed his advantage, raining blows on Creel's head and body, driving him back towards the shattered viewscreen. Creel lashed out with a desperate kick, catching Keith in the gut and doubling him over. The Ferengi loomed over him, his fists crackling with deadly energy, a snarl of triumph on his face. "Now you die, human!" But Jack was there, a jagged shard of metal clutched in his fist. With a roar of defiance, he drove the improvised blade deep into Creel's back, piercing the traitor's armor and burying itself in his flesh. Creel screamed in agony, his cybernetic body convulsing. He staggered forward, his eyes wide with shock and pain. Keith rolled aside as the Ferengi pitched headlong through the shattered view screen, vanishing into the void with a final, despairing howl. Keith and Jack lay on the deck, gasping for breath, their bodies shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. The bridge was a ruin around them, consoles sparking and smoking, the alarms still shrieking. But it was over. Creel was dead, his loyalist fleet destroyed. The Ferengi invasion had been stopped, and Earth was safe. Keith reached out and clasped his brother's hand, a weary smile on his face. "We did it, Jack. We saved the world." Jack grinned back, his teeth flashing in the gloom. "Guess those Ferengi picked the wrong planet to mess with." The Phoenix and the captured flagship limped back towards Earth, their hulls scorched and battered, but their crews flushed with victory. They had faced the Ferengi threat and emerged triumphant, thanks to the courage and skill of Keith, Jack, and their team. But as the blue world grew larger in their view screens, Keith knew that this was only the beginning. The galaxy was a vast and dangerous place, and there would always be new threats to face, new battles to fight. But for now he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had won the day, and Earth was safe, and as long as humans like Keith and his team stood ready to defend it, he knew that the planet would always have a chance. Keith circled Creel warily on the bridge of the Ferengi ship, his armor battered and scorched. The ruthless alien snarled, lashing out with his crackling energy gauntlets. Keith ducked and weaved, retaliating with precise strikes of his own. But Creel was fast, his cybernetic enhancements giving him an edge. He caught Keith with a brutal backhand, sending the human staggering. Keith's vision swam as he struggled to regain his footing. Nearby, Jack lay crumpled against a bulkhead, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. A jagged piece of shrapnel jutted from his abdomen, his face pale and twisted with pain. Keith's heart clenched at the sight of his brother's injury, but he couldn't afford to be distracted. Not with Creel bearing down on him, murder in his eyes. The Ferengi lunged, his gauntlets flaring with deadly energy. Keith rolled aside, the heat of the blast searing his skin. He came up firing, his blaster bolts ricocheting off Creel's armor. "You can't win, human," Creel sneered, stalking forward. "I am the future of the Ferengi Alliance. You are nothing but a primitive ape, a relic of a doomed species." He backed towards the panel, feigning weakness. Creel followed, a cruel grin spreading across his face. "Giving up already, human? I expected more from the great Keith Dixon." Keith let out a pained grunt, doubling over as if injured. Creel closed in, raising his gauntlets for a killing blow. At the last second, Keith lunged to the side, grabbing a fistful of sparking wires. With a roar of effort, he jammed the live wires into Creel's chest, the electricity surging through the Ferengi's cybernetic implants. Creel screamed in agony, his body convulsing as the ship's systems overloaded his enhancements. Keith pressed his advantage, raining blows on the stunned Ferengi. Creel staggered back, his armor smoking and sparking. With a final, desperate cry, he slammed his fist into a control panel. Alarms blared as the ship's self-destruct sequence activated. "If I die, I'm taking you with me," Creel howled, his eyes wild with madness. Keith didn't hesitate. He sprinted to Jack's side, hauling his brother to his feet. Together they staggered towards the teleportation pad, the ship shuddering around them. They materialized on the Phoenix's bridge, just as Creel's ship exploded, the shockwave rocking the human vessel. Keith and Jack collapsed to the deck, gasping for breath. "We did it," Jack wheezed, his face tight with pain. "We beat the bastards." Keith nodded, too exhausted to speak. He watched on the view screen as the remaining Ferengi ships surrendered, their crews realizing the futility of further resistance. The Phoenix and the captured Ferengi flagship limped back to Earth, their hulls scorched and battered. As they entered orbit, Cheering crowds gathered to welcome the heroes who had saved humanity from alien conquest. But even as they basked in the adulation of their fellow humans, Keith couldn't shake a sense of unease. Something told him that this was only the beginning, that there were greater threats lurking in the shadows of the galaxy. His fears were confirmed when General Thompson summoned the team for an urgent briefing. The old soldier's face was grim as he told them of the Orion Syndicate, a vast criminal empire that had been manipulating the Ferengi and other races for decades. "Their leader is known only as the Shadow," Thompson said, his voice tight with tension. "Intel suggests he's been gathering forces from across the galaxy, Klingons, Romulans, Cardassians, and worse. With the Ferengi defeated, he sees an opportunity to strike." Keith and his team exchanged worried glances. They had barely survived the Ferengi invasion, and now they faced an even greater threat. "What do we do, sir?" Keith asked, his jaw tight with tension. Thompson met his gaze, his eyes hard as flint. "We prepare for war, son. We gather our strength, we build our alliances, and we take the fight to the enemy. The Orion Syndicate thinks they can conquer the galaxy unopposed. It's up to us to show them just how wrong they are." Keith nodded, a grim determination settling over him. The battle against the Ferengi had been won, but the war for the galaxy was just beginning, and he and his team would be on the front lines, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With the threat of the Orion Syndicate looming over the galaxy, Keith and his team wasted no time in mobilizing a response. They embarked on a series of high-stakes missions to forge alliances with powerful alien races, knowing that only a united front could hope to stand against the Syndicate's might. On Vulcan, Keith met with the stoic leaders of the planet's ruling council, appealing to their logic and sense of galactic stability. The Vulcans, after carefully considering the evidence presented, agreed to lend their advanced technology and strategic expertise to the cause. The team then traveled to Andoria, where they engaged in tense negotiations with the proud and militaristic Andorian clans. Lieutenant Collins proved instrumental in these talks, her quick wit and sharp tongue earning the respect of the Andorian warriors. In the end, the Andorians pledged their formidable fleet to the growing coalition. On Teller Prime, Dr. Novak used his scientific acumen to win over the industrious Tellarites, convincing them that their advanced manufacturing capabilities would be key to supplying the war effort. The Tellarites, ever pragmatic, signed on to the alliance. But even as the team worked to build their coalition, the Orion Syndicate was on the move. During a recon mission on a remote moon, the team stumbled upon a hidden Syndicate base. They knew they had to act fast. Under the cover of darkness, Keith led a strike team into the heart of the enemy stronghold. Sergeant Henderson and his soldiers engaged the Syndicate's forces in a brutal firefight, their weapons flashing in the dim corridors. Keith and Jack fought their way to the base's command center, determined to uncover the Syndicate's plans. There, in a fortified bunker, they found the intelligence they sought, but they also found something else, a holographic projection of a figure cloaked in shadows. The Shadow himself, the mastermind behind the Orion Syndicate. "Keith Dixon," the figure rasped, his voice cold and mocking. "I've been watching you. You're a worthy adversary, but you fight for a lost cause." Keith stood tall, his eyes blazing with defiance. "We'll stop you," he growled. "Whatever it takes." The Shadow laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the bunker. "You have no idea what you're up against. The Omega device is the key to the galaxy's future. Join me, and you could have power beyond your wildest dreams." Keith's response was a blast from his rifle, the shot passing harmlessly through the hologram. "I'll never join you," he snarled. "I'll die before I let you win." Alarms blared as the base's self-destruct sequence initiated. Keith and his team raced to escape, dodging explosions and crumbling debris. They barely made it to their ship before the entire moon was consumed in a blinding flash. Back on Earth, the team pored over the stolen intelligence, piecing together the Syndicate's plans. The Omega device, it seemed, was an ancient weapon of terrifying power, capable of destroying entire star systems, and the Shadow intended to use it to bring the galaxy to its knees. But the device's location remained a mystery, hidden on a long-lost world, and protected by an unbreakable alien code. To find it, the team would need to decipher a language that had been dead for millennia. Keith slammed his fist on the table, his eyes hard with resolve. They had a new mission now, a race against time to find the Omega device before the Shadow could claim it. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. Marcus cracked his knuckles, a glint of excitement in his eyes. An alien language, huh? I love a good puzzle. Let's get to work. As the team threw themselves into the task of deciphering the ancient code, Keith couldn't shake the memory of his confrontation with the Shadow. The syndicate leader's words echoed in his mind, taunting him with the scope of the challenge they faced. But Keith had never been one to back down from a fight. He had a team of the best and brightest at his side, and a growing coalition of allies standing with them. They would find the Omega device, and they would stop the Shadow. No matter the cost. Keith pounded his fist on the console. Damn it, we need that translation or the Syndicate will beat us to the Omega device. Dr. Novak sighed. Keith, we're doing everything we can, but this is an incredibly complex language, one that hasn't been spoken in millennia. Deciphering it will take time. Time we don't have, Keith growled. He turned to the rest of the team, his eyes hard. We need to find someone who can translate this, fast, or we're all dead. Marcus's fingers flew over his keyboard. I might have something. There's a mention in some old archaeological records of a Dr. Xander Tolkien. He's supposed to be the galaxy's foremost expert on extinct alien languages. Jack frowned. Great, where do we find him? That's the thing, Marcus said. He dropped off the grid years ago. Last known location was some remote uninhabited planet called Erebus. Keith stood, his jaw set with determination. Then that's where we're going. Suit up, people. We've got a linguist to find. The Phoenix dropped out of warp in orbit around Erebus, a desolate, rocky world shrouded in thick, noxious clouds. Keith, Jack and Dr. Novak took a shuttle down to the surface, following the faint signal of what they hoped was Dr. Tolkien's base. They set down near a cluster of dilapidated prefab buildings, the metal structures corroded and pitted by the harsh atmosphere. As they approached, a figure emerged from one of the buildings, a rifle clutched in his hands. That's far enough, the man shouted, his voice muffled by his rebreather mask. Who are you? What do you want? Keith held up his hands, his own mask distorting his voice. Dr. Tolkien, we're not here to hurt you. We need your help. The man lowered his rifle slightly. My help? With what? We need you to translate an ancient alien language, Dr. Novak said. The fate of the galaxy may depend on it. He turned to go, but Keith called out, Please, Dr. Tolkien, we're running out of time. The Orion Syndicate is... Dr. Tolkien spun, his eyes wide. The Orion Syndicate, they're involved in this? Jack nodded grimly. They're trying to get their hands on an ancient weapon, one that could destroy entire star systems. Dr. Tolkien was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed. All right, I'll help you, but we need to hurry. If the Syndicate is after this weapon, we don't have much time. Back on the Phoenix, Dr. Tolkien pored over the ancient texts, muttering to himself as he worked. Keith and the others watched anxiously, the tension mounting with each passing hour. The general's haggard face appeared on the view screen, static distorting the image. Keith, the Syndicate has launched a full-scale assault. They're hitting Earth and our allies with everything they've got. In the background, Keith could hear the sounds of battle, explosions and screams echoing over the comm. His heart clenched with fear for his homeworld. We're doing everything we can to hold them back, Thompson said. But we need that Omega device. Tell me you've made progress. As the transmission cut off, Keith turned to Dr. Tolkien, a desperate urgency in his eyes. Doctor, please tell me you've found something. Dr. Tolkien looked up, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. I have it. The Lost World, the location of the Omega device. It's a planet called Karesh, in the Zeta Quadrant. But even as he opened his mouth to give the order to set course, Marcus cried out in alarm. Keith, we've got a problem. I've been monitoring Syndicate communications, and they've dispatched a fleet to Karesh. They must have been tracking our progress. Keith swore, his mind racing. They couldn't let the Syndicate get their hands on the Omega device, but they were just one ship, up against an entire fleet. He made his decision in a split second. Raven, lay in a course for Karesh, maximum speed. Jack, Dr. Tolkien, you're with me. We're taking a strike team to the surface to secure that device before the Syndicate can get their hands on it. As the Phoenix leaped into warp, Keith felt a grim determination settle over him. They were in a desperate race against time now, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. They had to reach Karesh first, they had to find the Omega device, and they had to stop the Shadow no matter the cost. The Phoenix hurtled through the void, pushing its engines to the limit. Keith, Jack, and Dr. Tolkien stood on the bridge, watching the stars streak by on the view screen. "We're coming up on the Zeta Quadrant now," Raven reported, her fingers flying over the controls. "ETA to Karesh, 2 hours. But they had no choice. The alternative was unthinkable. The Shadow, with the power to destroy entire star systems at his fingertips. The galaxy would fall under his tyrannical rule, billions enslaved or slaughtered. Keith wouldn't let that happen. He couldn't. "Raven, keep an eye out for any Syndicate patrols," he ordered. "We need to stay off their sensors. Marcus, I want you monitoring their communications. If they so much as sneeze, I want to know about it." Dr. Tolkien shifted nervously, clutching his satchel of ancient texts. "Are you sure this is wise, Captain Dixon? Striking out on our own, without the support of your fleet?" Keith met the linguist's gaze, his eyes hard. "We don't have a choice, Doctor. If we wait for backup, the Syndicate will beat us to the punch. This is our only shot." Jack laid a hand on Tolkien's shoulder. "Don't worry, Doc. Keith and I have been through worse scrapes than this. We'll get that device and be back in time for dinner." But even as he spoke, the Phoenix shuddered, alarms blaring. "What the hell was that?" Keith demanded. Raven's face was grim. "Some kind of spatial anomaly, Captain. Scanners are going haywire. I'm flying blind." The ship bucked and heaved, as if caught in the grip of some titanic hand. Consoles sparked and crew members were thrown from their seats. "Reroute auxiliary power to the shields," Keith shouted over the chaos, "and get me a visual on what's happening out there." The view screen flickered to life, and Keith felt his blood run cold. The space around them was warping and twisting, colors and shapes distorting in nauseating patterns. Bolts of energy lashed out from the maelstrom, slamming into the Phoenix's shields. "It's some kind of quantum filament," Dr. Novak called out from his station. "A tear in the fabric of space-time itself." "Can you get us out of it?" Keith asked, gripping the armrest of his chair as the ship shuddered again. "I'm trying," Raven grunted, her face slick with sweat. "But every time I push the engines, the filament drags us back in." Keith's mind raced. They couldn't afford to be delayed. Not with the Syndicate bearing down on Karesh, but if they couldn't break free of this anomaly, they'd be torn apart. "Marcus, can you scan for any weaknesses in the filament?" he asked. "Some way we could punch through?" The hacker shook his head, frustration etched on his face. "Negative, Captain. This thing is off the charts, like nothing I've ever seen before." Suddenly Dr. Tolkien let out a shout of excitement, his eyes wide as he stared at one of his ancient texts. "Captain, I think I have something. These glyphs, they talk about a similar phenomenon encountered by the ancients. They say the key to escaping the filament's grasp lies in harmonizing the ship's quantum field with the anomaly's resonance frequency." "He's saying we need to sync up our shields to the anomaly," Dr. Novak exclaimed, already typing furiously. "If we can match its frequency, we should be able to slip right through." Tense seconds ticked by as Novak and Tolkien worked, the ship shaking and groaning around them. Then, with a triumphant shout, Novak slammed his hand down on the console. "Shields synchronized." "Punch it!" Keith roared. Raven jammed the throttle forward, and the Phoenix surged ahead, the twisted colors of the anomaly parting before them like a curtain. With a bone-rattling jolt, they burst free, stars streaking past the view screen once more. A cheer went up from the crew, but Keith held up a hand for silence. They had escaped the anomaly, but their troubles were far from over. The Syndicate was still out there, racing towards Karesh, and the lost world itself was an unknown quantity. But as he looked around at his crew, at Jack's fierce grin, at Dr. Tolkien's determined set to his jaw, at the fire in Raven's eyes, Keith felt a surge of pride and hope. They had come this far, against all odds. They would see this through to the end, no matter what challenges lay ahead. For Earth, for the galaxy, for the future. "Raven, get us to Karesh," he said, his voice ringing with resolve. "We've got a date with destiny." The Phoenix touched down on the barren surface of Karesh, kicking up clouds of red dust. Keith, Jack, Dr. Tolkien, and the strike team disembarked, weapons at the ready. Before them loomed the ruins of a vast alien city, its towering spires and sprawling structures worn by countless ages. "The Omega device is here," Dr. Tolkien breathed, consulting his ancient texts. "In the heart of the city, in a chamber marked with the sign of the infinite." The team advanced into the city, picking their way through crumbling streets and vine-choked plazas. Strange statues and glyphs adorned every surface, hinting at the long-vanished race that had once called this place home. As they neared the center of the city, a massive structure came into view, a towering pyramid of gleaming black metal, untouched by the ravages of time. Dr. Tolkien consulted his texts again, his eyes widening. "That's it. The Chamber of the Infinite, the Omega device, must be inside." But as the team approached the pyramid's base, a hail of blaster fire erupted from the shadows. Syndicate soldiers poured from the surrounding ruins, led by a tall, cloaked figure, the Shadow himself. "Did you really think you could beat me here, Dixon?" the Shadow called out, his voice dripping with contempt. "The Omega device is mine. With its power, I will bring the galaxy to its knees." Keith and his team dove for cover, returning fire. The ancient city erupted into a fierce battle, blaster bolts scorching stone and metal. Syndicate soldiers pressed forward, supported by hulking alien mercenaries wielding devastating energy weapons. "Jack, take the team and hold them off," Keith shouted over the din of battle. "Tolkien and I will get the device." Jack nodded grimly, rallying the strike team. They formed a defensive perimeter, pouring fire into the advancing Syndicate forces. Keith and Dr. Tolkien sprinted for the pyramid's entrance, dodging blaster bolts and leaping over fallen rubble. Inside the pyramid was a maze of twisting corridors and vaulted chambers. Strange machinery hummed and pulsed, powered by an unknown energy source. Dr. Tolkien led the way, following the ancient signs towards the heart of the structure. At last, they burst into a vast circular chamber. In the center, suspended in a column of shimmering light, hung the Omega device, a complex array of crystals and circuitry, pulsing with an eerie blue glow. Dr. Tolkien rushed to the control podium, his fingers flying over the alien glyphs. "I can activate it, but I need time." Suddenly, a blaster bolt seared past Keith's head. He spun to see the Shadow standing in the chamber's entrance, flanked by his elite guard. "Time's up, Dixon," the Shadow snarled, leveling his blaster. "Step away from the device." Keith charged forward with a roar, closing the distance in a heartbeat. He slammed into the Shadow, knocking the blaster from his grip. The two grappled, trading crushing blows, cybernetics sparking and straining. The Shadow's guards moved to intervene, but a hail of blaster fire cut them down. Jack and the strike team had fought their way into the pyramid, leaving a trail of Syndicate bodies in their wake. As Keith and the Shadow fought, Dr. Tolkien worked frantically at the control podium, his brow slick with sweat. The Omega device began to pulse faster, the light growing brighter. But the Shadow was relentless, his cybernetic enhancements giving him a terrible strength. He battered Keith back, a cruel grin on his face. "You've failed, Dixon. The galaxy is mine." He lunged forward, his fist crackling with deadly energy. But Keith was faster. He sidestepped the blow and seized the Shadow's arm, twisting with all his strength. The cybernetic limb shattered, sparks and fluids spraying. The Shadow howled in agony, staggering back. Keith pressed his advantage, raining down blows, driving the Syndicate leader to his knees. A sudden cry rang out. Keith turned to see Dr. Tolkien slumping over the control podium, a smoking hole in his chest. The Shadow's last guard lowered his blaster, a sneer on his face. But it was too late. With his last breath, Dr. Tolkien slammed his hand down on the final glyph. The Omega device flared with blinding light, a wave of energy surging out from its core. Keith felt the energy wash over him, through him. On the surface above, Syndicate ships and weapons sparked and died, their systems overloaded by the device's power. Across the galaxy, the Syndicate's forces fell into disarray as their equipment failed, their soldiers fled. In the heart of the ancient city, in the Chamber of the Infinite, Keith stood over the broken body of the Shadow, the Omega device's light bathing them both. The war was over. The galaxy was safe. But as Keith looked down at Dr. Tolkien's still form, he knew the cost had been high. The eccentric linguist had given his life to decipher the device, to give Keith the chance to end the Syndicate's reign of terror. Keith bowed his head, silently vowing to honor that sacrifice. The battle was won, but there would be other threats, other challenges to face. And he and his team would be ready for them. As the blinding light of the Omega device faded, an eerie silence settled over the ancient alien city. Keith staggered to his feet, his armor battered and scorched, his body aching from the brutal battle. Around him, the remnants of the strike team emerged from the rubble, their faces etched with a mix of exhaustion and grim satisfaction. Jack limped to Keith's side, clutching a wound on his arm. "We did it, little brother, we won." Keith nodded, his eyes scanning the ruins for any signs of movement. The Syndicate soldiers lay still, their bodies broken and lifeless. "But at what cost?" he murmured, his thoughts turning to Dr. Tolkien and the others who had fallen in the fight. The team made their way back to the Phoenix, stepping over the shattered remains of the Syndicate's forces. As they lifted off from the planet's surface, they saw the true extent of the Omega device's power. The Syndicate's ships hung dead in space, their systems fried by the energy wave. But even as they watched, the allied alien vessels began to turn on each other, weapons flaring to life as old rivalries and territorial disputes resurfaced. Without the Syndicate's iron grip to keep them in line, the fragile alliances crumbled. The journey back to Earth was subdued, the weight of their victory tempered by the knowledge of the chaos they had unleashed. When they arrived, they were greeted as heroes, with cheering crowds and grand celebrations in their honor. But Keith found no joy in the accolades. He saw the fear and uncertainty in the eyes of the people, the whispered conversations about the wars brewing on the horizon. The Vulcans, Andorians, and Tellarites, once united against the Syndicate, now eyed each other with suspicion and hostility. In the days that followed, Keith watched as Earth struggled to find its place in the new galactic order. The government scrambled to forge new alliances, to build up its military might in preparation for the coming storm. But with each passing day, the situation grew more dire. Keith's friends tried to comfort him, to assure him that he had done the right thing, but the guilt and doubt gnawed at him, the faces of the fallen haunting his dreams. He began to withdraw, spending long hours alone, lost in his own dark thoughts. One evening, as he sat in his quarters staring out at the stars, Jack barged in, his face lined with concern. "Keith, what the hell is going on with you? You've been avoiding everyone for weeks." Keith sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I can't do this anymore, Jack. I can't pretend that everything is okay, that we didn't just unleash hell on the galaxy." Jack sat down beside him, his voice softening. "Keith, you did what you had to do. The Syndicate would have enslaved or destroyed us all. You saved billions of lives." "But at what cost?" Keith repeated, his voice cracking. "How many more will die in the wars to come? How much blood will be on my hands?" He stood abruptly, grabbing his bag and slinging it over his shoulder. "I need to go, Jack. I need to find my own way to figure out what I'm supposed to do now." Jack started to protest, but something in Keith's eyes made him pause. He nodded slowly, clasping his brother's shoulder. "Just promise me you'll be careful out there, and remember, you always have a home here." As the years passed, the galaxy descended into chaos. the once allied races tearing at each other's throats in a brutal struggle for dominance. Planets burned, billions suffered, and the dream of a united galaxy seemed to fade like a distant memory. But whispers began to spread of a lone human warrior, a man who fought against the tyranny and oppression of the warring factions. They spoke of his courage, his skill in battle, his unwavering dedication to justice. He became a legend, a symbol of hope for the downtrodden and the desperate. Some said he was a ghost, a figment of the imagination. Others claimed he was a god, sent to deliver them from their suffering. But those who had seen him in action knew the truth. He was Keith Dixon, the hero who had saved the galaxy from the Syndicate, now fighting to save it from itself. Across the stars, Keith waged his solitary war, striking at the heart of the corrupt and the powerful. He liberated slave camps, destroyed weapons factories, and brought hope to the hopeless. But for every victory, there were countless defeats, countless lives lost in the unending cycle of violence. And yet, Keith fought on, driven by a sense of duty, a need to atone for the lives lost in his name. Even as the years took their toll, as his body grew weary and his spirit grew heavy, he refused to give up. For he knew that somewhere out there, in the vast expanse of the galaxy, there were still those who believed in a better future. And as long as there was even a flicker of hope, he would keep fighting, keep pushing back against the darkness. It was a heavy burden, a lonely path, but it was the only one he knew how to walk. For in the end, Keith Dixon was more than just a man. He was a symbol, a legend, a testament to the indomitable will of the human spirit. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.